known by now that I had the opportunity and adventure of a lifetime in May of last year, when a bunch of us riders set out from Sycamore Shoals State Park in Tennessee and followed the Wilderness Road through the Cumberland Gap and on to Fort Boonesboro. And let me tell you, it was a thrill of a lifetime. I have been a historical reenactor for 39 years. And no, I take that back, I got it backwards. I've been a historical reenactor for 41 years, and I've played the fiddle for 39 of those years. And it was because of the Eastern Rendezvous, where I would go and stand around the campfire at night, watch the musicians playing and the judge passing and everyone having a good time and dancing, that I decided, that's for me, I want to be a part of that scene. And I had music growing up in grade school and high school, marching band, concert band, and all of that. But I never played any string instruments. And I think it was my discovery of American history in college and shortly after when I started reenacting scene that I decided I wanted to play music again. I remember I went to see my old roommate who played banjo and guitar, and I said, Roy, I think I might like to learn to play banjo. He says, tell you what, he says, I've got a fiddle, case and bow, I'll sell you for 40 bucks. I said, well, all right, I'm a fiddler. And so I still have that fiddle. And it's not a very good fiddle, but the thing is, the bow that came with that was worth probably $1,000. And that's one of my favorite bows here. But it was a great chance to experience American history, crossing through that gap on horseback. And all of us were dressed in period-correct clothing. Our horses had period-correct tack and gear. But I had something that was special to me at any rate, because I carried on my back the fiddle. And I wondered to myself, how many of the hundreds of thousands of people that crossed through that Cumberland Gap in the westward expansion of America, how many of those people carried their fiddle with them? And chances are there was a good many of them. Because in those days, a fiddle was very lightweight, as it is now. In fact, the violin has remained relatively unchanged for nearly 500 years. That's something. We come to these shows and we look and see how our firearms have evolved. And violins back in the golden age, of course, they had schools of construction, schools of thought and design. But the basic element is the same as it is today. And I was enamored with that. And I thought that here's a chance that I could combine my love of music and love of craftsmanship and love of history and be able to do a little bit of all. So I was born on the north shore of the United States, on the shore of Lake Erie, about 40 miles east of Cleveland, a little town called Madison, Ohio. And after graduating from high school, I moved down to Morgantown, West Virginia, where I still reside. And I always tell people the reason I stayed is because I fell in love with the mountains and decided to make them my home. And so I was fortunate to find a career there. Like Mel said, I worked on the locks and dams for the Corps of Engineers. And the thing I loved about West Virginia, and I've gone on to find so much in the South, Kentucky, Tennessee, and other states, is their heritage. That's something to me that was missing in Ohio. Coming to the mountains, people love their history, love their heritage, and they love their music. So the title of my program today, and I promise it will be brief because we do have something very important to get into. Mel asked me if I wanted to give my talk while we were tasting the whiskey, and I said, maybe that might not be a good idea. But bridging the centuries with music. The thing that amazes me about music is that it's an expression of the human spirit. Just like you might argue that wood carving, engraving, scrimshawing, weaving, quilling, everything that we do here, everything we see on these tables is an expression of the human spirit. And we can see and feel the textures, and we can examine and enjoy these pieces on these tables with those senses. But here is something that's very historical, and then we can add the sense of hearing. We can hear the voice of history. These guns, these powder horns, these other accoutrements are fairly mute. And you have to be well researched to understand what they tell us. But the thing about music is, it's a universal language. And not everyone can speak it. But everyone can enjoy it and understand it and let it move their own spirit in whichever way. Either to sing, or to dance, or to play along. So that makes music special to me, and it ties it into history for me. I know some of you have known me a lot of years, and I've been here, I think this is my 5th year coming to the Lake Cumberland show. You've heard me play a lot of tunes, but it's amazing that Al wanted me to get up and make this presentation and make that connection for you with music and history that I've come to enjoy so much. All right, well, you know, I gave programs to school children and civic groups all along the way, along the end of this road when we went through in May. And I would tell people and children the same thing that I just told you and play some tunes. The fascinating thing about a violin, like I said, it's lightweight, easy to carry. It crossed the ocean with the immigrants to this country. And when they were looking for a new home and looking to the west, they took their music with them. So I was able to do that on this ride. And one of the things they saw in abundance was the works of nature, the work of God, and the work of water in these mountains. So I would always start out the tune for my group talk, an old Appalachian tune called Over the Waterfall. I'll play it for you now. Well known that most of the people that came through that Cumberland Gap had their origins in the British Isles, Scotland, Ireland, England, Wales, and some German immigrants as well. So I often follow the tune I've known for a number of years, a Scottish tune called The Flowers of Edinburgh. folks right now are hearing the voice of history. Most of these violins that I have in this case are the ones I perform with, and each of them are over 200 years old. They're believed to be over 200 years old. It is thought that they are very early German copies of some of the Golden Age Italian masters. This is a copy of a Carlo Bergonzi, and the other one, which I will get out in a little bit, is a copy of Joseph Guarneri. And it is a real privilege to be able to play these vintage instruments and to enjoy the quality of the tone that comes through the ages. And we talk about patina of wood and metal on these tables. If you want to see some beautiful 200-year-old patina, come look at these violins after my program, and it's just a thrill to be the caretaker of them during my lifetime. And just like we wonder at a beautiful crafted rifle or fowler, who carried it? Who took it where? And what sort of things did it experience, or what sort of experiences did it cause or react to during its life on this earth? I feel the same way when I have a wonderful old violin in my hand. I had the great privilege about 20 years ago to play a genuine Stradivarius violin. And it wasn't just any Stradivarius violin. It was made in 1727, and it was the Paganini violin. Nicholas Paganini was one of the great Italian virtuosos of the early 19th century. And this was a violin that he owned, and he called it the elephant, because when it was in the room, there was no mistaking. So it's quite a thrill to be able to do that. And people ask me, what was it like? The first thing, when it was placed in my hands, I noticed it was light as a feather. And so that helped me in my violin making later on, that every excess bit of wood would absorb the vibrations of the strings and dampen the sound. So they eliminated all of the excess wood down to the bare minimum. They were lightweight, and I would tell people the sound was like the difference between cut glass and a diamond. It was just spectacular. So that was a real thrill. All right, well, I played a Scottish tune. How about an Irish tune? This is one I like. It's kind of fun. And it's called "Oh, Brother Flanagan." Here's a couple tunes that kind of fit in with history. There's a couple of tunes. The first one's called Indian Corn. That's kind of self-explanatory. And the second one that I like to follow it with is called Punchin' Floor. Now, Punchin' Floor is something in the early days when they would come to their new home in the wilderness and build a log cabin. Many times the women of the family would have to put up with a hard-packed dirt floor in their cabin for a number of years until the man of the house could get the fields cleared and the crops in the ground. So eventually, when he got around to putting a floor in the cabin, in those days what they would do is split the logs in half, put the round side down and the flat side up, and butted side by side. That was the floor. And as you can imagine, anyone that split wood knows that it doesn't split perfectly flat every time. So you have high spots, low spots, and probably wouldn't be too hard to lose your change in there. It would just roll into a depression in the log and you could pick it up if they had any change. Anyway, that's a puncheon floor, and you can hear that, the high and low spots, in the second part of the tune. So first one is called Indian Corn, and then Puncheon Floor. The other night when I was worrying over my program, and thought came to me that my own musical journey has sort of evolved along the same line that music did in America. I started out playing mostly Celtic music, and moving to West Virginia into the mountains, that music, the Celtic music, had morphed into what we call old-time music. And that's primarily the standard in West Virginia today is mostly old-time music. And oftentimes you go up in these secluded hollows, you find fiddlers that play tunes that come from the old country, the British Isles. And they play them in similar versions and similar manners, and oftentimes on very old instruments as well. So my musical journey has sort of mirrored that, and now I play mostly old time. Occasionally I'll play a Celtic tune, but let's see, what do I want to play next? All right. to do something political. Well, all right. Well, the year is 1803, and the presidential election was on, and the candidate that would eventually become the winner and our third president of the United States, Thomas Jefferson. In those days, they didn't have radios, they didn't have television, you didn't hear these jingles and songs everywhere you went, unless they were having a rally and you had live musicians performing. But he chose for his campaign tune an old tune, and I believe it's Scottish in origin, and the title of his campaign song was Jefferson and Liberty. But it comes from an old tune called the Bay of Bantry, or the Gabio. And I don't know what the Gabio means. I know they refer to a fish. Of course, in the British Isles, they do a lot of fishing. Another version of the Gabio, gob to a sailor, is his mouth. And so maybe they're eating the fish they caught. But at any rate, here's the tune, Jefferson and Liberty, or the Bay of Bantry. One thing I like to emphasize to students when I was playing along the Wilderness Road is that today we sort of take music for granted. If we take a ride in our cars, of course, which didn't exist then, we push a button, turn on the radio, we go into a store, maybe at Christmas time, we're bombarded with Christmas carols, music on television, music on the computer, music in an elevator, it's everywhere. And we kind of tune it out. Well, not so in the 18th century. The only music that was available was when you had a live musician in your presence. So I think they take it, I think they valued music a lot more then. And I understand that oftentimes at any tavern you would go to, there would be a fiddle hanging on the wall, available for anyone that wished to take it down and play. And a lot of notable people in our history played the violin. Maybe you're aware of some of them. Thomas Jefferson was a fiddler. Davy Crockett. And let's see, who else? Anyone think of anyone else who played the fiddle? At any rate, it was a common thing. People enjoyed it. And it was the only music they had. Well, I'd like to finish up here because we've got some important business to do. And I've been joking the last day or so that probably the last tune should be Roll Out the Barrel. But we're going to do that eventually. Anyway, look at this beautiful violin. I want to tell you a little story about this violin. First of all, the reason I have two of them in my case is because they're tuned differently. The strings are tuned differently. And this is something that some of the old-time fiddlers would do. They'd experiment with different tunings to get a different sound completely out of the violin when they played some of these tunes. And this is tuned differently, so I can play a few tunes on it that I can't on the other one. But I want to tell you how I came to get this fiddle. A dear friend told me one time, he said, don't worry about going out and looking for your violin that you will play and perform, that you connect with emotionally. He said, that violin will find you. And this violin found me. For about 30 years now, I've done repair work on instruments of the violin family: violin, viola, cello, bass. And of course, musicians and instructors around the area where I live would find out and bring me instruments to repair. And one such gentleman, his name was Lowell Gray, and he was the strings teacher at the local high school. And he was in that position for about 30 years. And at first, we developed a business relationship. He would bring me violins from his students at school and various community orchestras that he worked with. And over that course of 30 years, the business relationship turned into a friendship. And I hadn't heard from Lowell in a few years, and finally he gave me a call. He said, Larry, he said, come on over to the house. He said, I've got a student violin I'd like you to take a look at, need some work. I said, okay. So I went over, and he showed me the student violin. I said, okay, needs this and that and that. I said, I'll take care of it. And he went over to a cabinet along the wall, and he pulled out a violin case, and I recognized it as his case. And he pulled the violin out of the case, and he sort of looked at it longingly. And he handed it to me. He said, Larry, he said, see what you can do to bring out the best sound, the best voice in this instrument. I said, all right. So I took it home. I had it for about a week. I did the repairs on the student violin. I had a chance to play this violin for a week. And it captured my spirit. The voice is remarkable. This is a pattern after Joseph Guarnerius, and they have a distinct, different tone than your Stradivariuses or Amatis or the different violin makers. Well, Lowell told me something that was pretty unnerving. He said, Larry, says, I've got a terminal illness. I only have about a month to live. And I was very sorry to hear that. But at any rate, I went home and I looked at the fiddle and played it. I got to thinking, what's going to become of that violin when Lowell passes? So I tried to think of a way, a sensitive way, to ask him that. And then it came to me. So I went back to him a week later, showed him the student violin, and he said, fine, that's great. And I said, Lowell, I said, your violin here has a remarkable voice. I said, this is just incredible. It's probably one of the top 3 violins I've ever had the pleasure of playing. I said, would you please consider me should you ever want to sell it? And he looked at me and he said, I already have. He said, just one more thing I would like to ask. Let me keep it until I can't enjoy it anymore. And I said, all right, Lowell. So we came to arrangements over the transfer of the fiddle, and when Lowell passed away, his wife called me and said, Larry, come and get your fiddle. But I also want to mention that Lowell had an incredible sense of humor. And he was a member of this men's choral group. They sang sort of barbershop quartet music, but it was a whole choir of men's voices. It was called The Mountaineers. So Lowell was in his sick bed at home, and he was asleep, and then his wife told me this story. And he said a group of the Mountaineers came over to visit Lowell in his deathbed. And she shook him on the shoulder, and all the men were gathered around the bed. And Lowell woke up, and he rolled over, and he said, "Oh no." He said, "I've died and gone to hell." So, here's one for you, Lowell. This is an old tune. Actually, it's not very old. It's maybe 15, 20 years old, but there's an incredible fiddler in Virginia. His name is Jim Childress, and I found his recording about 5 years ago. And the unique thing about Jim Childress's music is every tune on that recording he wrote. And he wrote it in an old-time style. And I decided, wow, I want to play fiddle like that. And so I think I learned 10 of the 16 tunes on that recording. It just has an old, haunting sound, up the foggy hollow kind of sound. And it's got that cross tuning so that the bottom strings act sort of like a drone, sort of like a bagpipe. I'll play this for you and for Lowell. And then after it's over, we'll get on with more important things. This is called Firefly. Rattlesnake rattles in the body of the violin, and yes, I have on several occasions. A lot of the old timers, well, if you hear it, it definitely buzzes with the vibrations of the playing of the instruments, so it adds a little buzz to it. Yeah. Anybody else have any questions for me? Yes, Mark.
What's the difference between the bows? Do they bring out a different sound?
Absolutely. Well, for classic violinists, they search for a proper bow to match the violin. And this is one such bow for me, because a dear friend of mine lent me a case full of bows one time. He said, try them all, pick out the one you want, and, you know, if you wish to buy it, you can buy it. And there was about 20 bows in that case, And I remember on a midnight shift, down at the lock, things were pretty dull and quiet and boring. And I played the same fiddle, the same tune with every bow in that case. And this is the one I picked. And this is a French bow. I don't know how old it is, but I bought it and it produced the best sound. And the reason it does that, because maybe not quite so like, or maybe unlike, a violin being unlike a muzzleloading gun, it is a living thing. It vibrates, it resonates, it changes with the humidity, and it affects the tone, the voice. And it affects the tension on the strings and the bridge. A bow is basically a wooden, the stick is a spring, and it holds that horsehair in tension. And so the vibrations that go to the horsehair is reflected by the tension of the bow back into the violin. And it affects the volume, the quality of the tone, and the ability of the instrument to resonate. So, yes, a bow different bows will react differently on the same instrument. It's just a fascinating thing. A violin is a wooden machine. And depending on the construction style, it could have as many as 70 different individual parts. And I know that I built one violin, and I know that it takes some time for all those individual pieces to come into equilibrium with each other, sort of like a marriage. And they say a violin improves in age for the first 100, or improves in tone for the first 100 years. For the second 100 years, it's at its peak, and for the third 100 years, it might coast for a while in quality of tone and then slowly start to lose its, what's the word I want? Quality. And the earliest known violin to exist that I have seen reference to is in the museum in Cremona, Italy, and it was made in 1566. And the curator of the museum takes these instruments out, of course, Stradivari and Amatis and Guarneris, and this one is an Amati made in 1566, and he plays them every other day. He'll play certain violins one day, other violins another day. That keeps the wooden fibers loose and supple and able to resonate. I've heard recordings of that 1566 violin played, and it's heavenly. It is heavenly. So, no one else? Thank you.
Thank you, Larry. It's really great, really a treat. And again, thank you all so very much for hanging around tonight. And we're